Honestly,
When someone asks me
unbalanced.
what the book is about, my kind of stock response is that it's about what's wrong with work-life balance as a mental model and the mental model with which I think we should replace it. So, at heart, I am, and I almost struggle with this in like the yoga community, but I'm like really anti-balance as a metric.
Mhm.
I feel it is like by definition static. And then you put that work life kind of, format in front of it. And not only is it static, but then it's really oppositional as well. Like it presumes that these things are equally weighted and against each other. Um, and really binary. And when I was researching the book, I had this kind of sense, and I had this Dance framework that I was kind of thinking about and speaking about, but kind of going. I'm reading a little bit more deeply about the subject, and I found some really amazing research that showed how much the language we use affects our experience of the real world, of like what we're actually experiencing day to day life. They've done a lot of these studies based on motherhood and work, and whether you pair motherhood and work in a positive light or in a more negative light, and that literally changes a mother's experience of her day. And it just like was a real light bulb moment for me, because I was like, am I creating this kind of straw man in work life balance? But I don't think I am, because I think it really changes how we experience these things. And
Mm.
if you're starting from a thing that is really static, and that your life is changing, your lives before you had your son 8 months ago is so different to what it is now, and what he's going to need when he's a toddler, or what you guys are going to need in a few years' time, and what your families need, and what work opportunities, and we go through good times, we go through crisis times. Like, life is not static ever, and nor do I think we want it to be. Um and I really feel like talking about a much more dynamic model, which the dials is meant to be, which I share in the book, is kind of a better starting place, and hopefully a better place to go forward for people as well. So yeah, no thank you to balance, except on my yoga mat.
It reminded me what you said there about moving forwards. There's a quote by Anais Nin, and I used to love it. That perfection is static, and I am in full progress.
I love
And
that.
I like that idea. So,
Yes,
are you suggesting a form of intentional imbalance when needs arise?
that is a great way of describing it. So the framework that I am kind of advocating we replace work life balance with is called the dials. And it's made up of 4 parts. So the part one is a dashboard, and this is kind of your goals, your priorities, your values. I think in a lot of these conversations about work and life, we skip forward to the you compare like this job or that job, or do I stay in London, do I leave London, like there's so many different choices we have to make in life. And the truth is, there's no quote unquote right answer, right? The right answer for you is going to be a different one to what I would need in my life. And it's hard to make those right decisions for us without those guiding values, goals, and priorities. So that's the dashboard. And then the dials, work is not one thing, life is not one thing. You've got a new dial on your dashboard of your son. But even work is your day-to-day job. Maybe you're writing a book, maybe you're trying to get yourself into a new studio, you've got a new work project. Holly, you've been working on your album, and now you're trying to get it out into the world. Like, work is made up of all these different component parts. Life is work made up of all of these different component parts. And then the third part of the framework is the levels. Like, those dials need to get like dialed up or dialed down depending on the season of life, the opportunities or the needs that are in front of us. And it's that kind of like deliberate, intentional, either acknowledgement of how like the universe is setting your dials, because often we don't get
Mhm.
to choose. The universe is going to put like, my family member is going through a health crisis and I need to be with them, dial on your dashboard. Or it like, you get made redundant and your main work dial gets turned down to 0. Like, there are things you can't decide. Hopefully we all get to decide what those levels are more often than not. But that is the main part of the dials. And then the fourth part, I talk about kind of how you can make each of those 3 sections as resilient as possible. But yeah, it is very intentional and deliberate, but also, I hope, really acknowledging like the reality that all of us are facing, And I speak from a position of incredible privilege on a lot of this, but like life, the world is not set up to make any of this easy, right? You look at a cost of living crisis this year and earlier. You look at the cost of childcare in the UK. You look at the fact that as women, our peak career years are often our peak childbearing years. All of this stuff is just really, really complicated and really, really hard to do. There aren't enough hours a day in the day. The structures that exist societally and don't make it easy either. And so my hope is that the framework kind of has that knitted into it as well, that there's that piece of this is not all in your control. And if you're finding it difficult to make it work, that's not because you've done something wrong. That's because life is really hard and you can't have all these dials turned up at the same time. So that is my ambition with it all. And the readers of the book will tell me whether I've conveyed that message well or not.
What gave you the inspiration for this model? Was there a point in your life where you thought, okay, work-life balance just isn't doing it for me and this isn't working, so therefore I need to find something else that does work? Was there a moment, or was it just a gradual thought progression?
So it'd been something, I'm an investment banker by trade, so my work is pretty intense. And in 2014, I was cycling to work and I got hit by a van. And I broke my collarbone and hurt my shoulder. And I did like the classic, like A, young person thing. I was in my 20s at the time, and B, I think just general person thing of, I went to physio for a few weeks and I didn't do any of the exercises I was set. And then, a few months later, I was like, oh my God, I still can't move my arm properly. And my physio was like, look, we're done with sessions. You don't have any more, but you should like try something else that gets you mobile. Like, what about yoga? Like, okay, I guess like I want to be able to lift my arm above my head. This would be useful. And so I started going to yoga. There was a yoga studio, is a yoga studio at my work, and there was an Iyengar teacher there. And so I started going to classes with her. And she was classic Iyengar teacher. She was so mean and so like scathing about what I could and couldn't do and how to do it. But I fell in love with it. And so that, weird, all kind of weird events. And I'm sat here with my two cats on my lap. But I started practicing yoga at home and my cats were there. It was the beginning of Instagram, and my Instagram account kind of took off. And scroll forward a few years, I was doing a lot of independent yoga practice. I fell in love with it, doing much more vinyasa and things. And so I started teaching, I did my yoga teacher training. I started teaching a workshop that was kind of the question that everyone was asking me on Instagram, which was how to practice yoga independently, because that was how I was fitting it in around kind of a very, very busy career. And then I was pregnant with my first son. So this is back in 2017. And teaching workshops and having a kid and working was not going to be scalable for me. So I wrote that workshop into a book and I self-published that book. And then at the beginning of COVID, it got published for real. So Hachette published it. It was the environment, self-practice, I guess, was a thing for so many of us during COVID. But I had been a bit kind of secret squirrel about who I was up until the point that the book got published for real in 2020. I talked about having this big job, but I didn't put my name on Instagram. I didn't talk about the field that I worked in. I didn't talk about the company that I worked at. And so when the book came out for real and I put my name on it for the first time, there was this kind of, wait, hang on a sec, you're an investment banker, you work at this huge American company, you've just had a kid. At the time I had 150,000 followers on Instagram, you're writing books, and everyone was like, whoa, 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 how are you doing this and having any work-life balance? And I was like, well, like, I don't think about it like that. Like when I had my son, I was off work for 6 months. My work dial was turned to zero and I was there on maternity leave with my son. One of the benefits of being at a corporate, I get amazing paid maternity leave. And we should talk about, some of the challenges that you guys might have faced being freelancers, running your own businesses. But that was something I could do because it's set up in my life. And then I went back to work and there was a big promotion I was up for. And I went back to work and I really dialed up my work dial and I got promoted. And it was just this like lived experience of these different opportunities and needs coming up in my life. And then COVID happened and that, threw all sorts of spanners into my dials. But that was really the genesis of the book. It was answering the question after my first book came out, of like how I did it and seemingly like was happy, I guess, in all of it. That was a very long answer to your question.
No,
I'm sorry.
love that. Thank you.
No, thank you. You talked about how you intentionally changed dials, and you intuitively knew the dials that needed to be shifted. And I guess the question here is, how does a person know really what dial needs to be shifted? So for someone who is deeply, let's say they're unhappy in their current situation, what they feel like they're missing out is love. And so they need to dial, they might think they need to dial at the Tinder dial a little bit. However, what they might really need actually is to dial up the work one, so they can actually feel more secure in themselves, or they need to dial up the personal development one, so that actually they're not looking for something outside themselves. What they're looking for is self-development, which then means that a relationship might be found. So that's one example. But how would you advise people to, or is there an exercise you advise for people to work out which dials need to be shifted at a particular time?
Such a great question. And the framework, those three parts of the framework: dashboard, dials, levels, are meant to be there like in to stand next to each other, but also to be a process. Like if you were there, you're like, something doesn't feel right, like I'm not in the place I want to be. Is it because you don't have the dials here in your life that are expressing your dashboard properly? Is it that the levels on those dials are set in the wrong place, that you're spending too much time on work and not enough time on like your intimate relationships? Or is it that you're kicking ass at your yoga practice, but kind of you've let a friendship drop? Like like the interaction of those things, I think, can be really powerful. And I really don't think I'm kind of reinventing, really mixing metaphors here, like reinventing the wheel. But I hope that like these are just kind of prompts that can live in people's heads when they think, hang on a sec, something's not right. Like, how can I just run through my dashboard, my dials, my levels, and that like scaffolding gives you a place to think about it and hopefully get to an answer and collect some data. I've just had the busiest 4 months of my life. I started a new role at the beginning of the year, the book, finishing off the book and the book coming out. Those two things happening simultaneously has been like, to be honest, massively suboptimal. But you can't often decide the timing of these things in life. But it's also been data collection for me. My publishers asked me if I'm going to write another book, and the answer for the foreseeable future is no. Like, I've had an amazing few months, really proud of what I've done, but it's also been a bit much, and I'm like, I can't keep these dials going for any longer. And so I'm not regretting it, I'm not feeling guilty about it, but now I've collected some data and I've decided that I'm not going to do it again.
When you reflect on the dials, what is the process? Do you have 3 A4 bits of paper? Have you constructed some dials in the house, like some do you have an interactive room?
Look, I mean, that would be cool. In the book, at the end of the first half of the book, I kind of go through what's wrong with work-life balance as the mental model, and a chapter by chapter on dashboard, dials, levels, and then resilience. And the end of each of those chapters is like a little half-page kind of question and answer kind of prompt section that if you were so inclined, you could kind of jot down, fill in the gaps. And I've written out my dials. I kind of say to people that you probably want a couple of handfuls. I think I have a bit too many at the moment. I've got like 15 or so. So you can like write them out. My goal with the whole framework is that they can just live in your head. I don't want it to be this this other thing that you have to do, and that you have to attend to it every month, and that if you haven't updated your worksheet, this is another stick with which to beat yourself when you're failing. But my hope is, through the book, that there are lots of kind of prompts and jump off points. And there's some research there in the dials chapter where I talk people through different categories they can think of, and I think those buckets, I hope, can be helpful prompts for people of like, oh, actually I think about my work dials, I had 3 or 4 of them last year. This year, it's my new job in the book. I have my me dials, and that's yoga and Peloton and reading and rest. I have a rest dial at the moment, which is really important to me. I have my family, my kids. Each of my kids is a dial. They need different things at different times. I have a few money impact and money dials. That's about, like earning my income separate to work. I really encourage people to think about those things separately. Donating, investing, pension. A little bit boring, but I think these things are important to think about. And then I have a little section for impact. The last chapter of the book is all about impact. So I think there's, I very rarely have conversations with people about career and life where they're not thinking about how to make a positive impact on the world. And I think that can be having those dials. There are many people, and I think you guys probably fall into this category, I think, who are fortunate enough or deliberate enough to have crafted impact into their careers. And there are lots of us who, either choice or otherwise, don't have that same, facet of our careers, but there are ways that we can, and I think really should, be having impact with how we live our lives. And so I think about those as different dials as well.
Is there a sort of underlying intention of, once all of your dials are in place, as it were, is the underlying intention happiness or fulfillment, or does it sort of depend on where you're at in your life? Is it different for every person? What would you say about that?
Look, the word I use a lot in the book is fulfillment. I find myself saying a lot, reading my kids, like, I just want them to be happy. I just want them to be happy. And when I really think about that, that's not necessarily true, right? I want them to be able, to like live a fulfilled life and to thrive with whatever's going to get thrown at them. And I have found the framework incredibly empowering. I think, especially, Adam, you were saying at the start, like, all of these challenges of, quite like literally just not having enough time in the day to do all the things that you either want to do or feel like you should be doing. And there's a whole bunch of guilt, I think, that's in there, especially once you become a parent. And, that kind of intention behind the dials framework, I think, alleviates some of that for me, and helps me hone in on the fact that the choices that I'm making, or sometimes forced to make, about how I live my life and how I spend my time, like, I'm doing my best, and it is what gets me fulfillment. And that's enough.
And you talk about the dashboard, and this is just a question that intrigues me, because you say the dashboard is about having your own personal goals, your values, knowing who you are as a person, what you want. What if you don't quite know what you want in life, or you're not sure of what your values are? What would you say is someone's starting point in that case?
Like, I tell a bunch of these stories in the book of like how I kind of got these things wrong. Lots of the goals I set myself in my early 20s and younger were really, really, really prescriptive things. And when the kind of, I don't call it a step, I kind of call it, like, I literally put it as like a kind of little bracket around the 3 steps of resilience. It's encouraging people, and I think, to make your dashboard more resilient is to really broaden it out. And I had these like crazy prescriptive goals of, like, how of being mortgage free by a certain age, having a certain number of kids, and reaching a certain point in my career before I had a kid, and all of this stuff that, now I'm 37, I realize was incredibly naive. And also thinking about it like that, like, got me further away from what those goals were actually about, because I was so stressed about focusing on the specifics, when actually what mattered to me, talking about mortgages, was an element of like home and stability. My father was in the military. I grew up, I lived in 18 houses by the time 13 houses by the time I was 18.
Wow.
So that, like, sense of home and stability and financial stability was really important to me. Like, there's career goals in there, and the kids bit. And again, I think, and I'm sure we're all in this kind of point in our lives, you either walk the path yourself, or you walk it with loved ones. Like, the challenges of having children, and fertility and infertility and all of those kind of things, you never know whether you're going to be able to have the family that you want, whether that's whether that's children or other kind of close relationships, that doesn't mean you don't have a family. That doesn't mean that the version of family you end up with is less valid or less important. And so I didn't get any of that stuff right to start with, and I'm like really fascinated now. I feel I've articulated it well to see how those things develop in my life through my 40s and my 50s. But I want, after I talk about the Dials framework, the next chapter is about quitting, and I talk about the kind of challenges of what I call like the progressively less shit years of like of your early 20s, like the first 5 years of any career worth having are kind of a bit shit and they get progressively less shit. But I think these things are not easy. I don't expect an 18-year-old or 21-year-old or hell even like a 31 or 35-year-old to have it all sorted out. But I hope like having these prompts and having I did a lot of interviews for the books, and then there's lots of little kind of case studies, other people's stories and other people's nuggets of wisdom and experience in there too. And I hope that there's enough in there that just like plants some seeds that helps people work it out with time.
I think these seeds are needed because, my view is most 20, 25-year-olds, their success or what they deem success to be is kind of these, as you say, purely objective. It's objective, and actually there's been not a lot of reflection. It's more, what does society deem to be successful? What and mortgage free, etc., is all these benchmarks. And if you don't take any time to try and create your own values, you will always be led to what other people think happiness and success is, which will then undoubtedly leave you to be unhappy. And I really like the point you mentioned there about you wanting to be mortgage free, but then actually where that was coming from was a need for stability. And there's a guy called Derek Sivers, who's a founder of CD Baby. I'm actually listening to a conversation with him and about his approach to analyzing his desires. And he said, actually, he kept thinking at one point, he worked in a New York apartment near a train track and kept thinking, all I need is to go to a beach. I need to go to a beach in the Philippines. Then actually he took down a little bit and said, actually, no, that's not what I need. What I'm stressed by is a noise because of the train track. So actually the solution to that is invest the amount of money that a flight to the Philippines would cost into soundproofing my studio. And that's actually, that was what he needed and the why. And I think it's always important for us to dig down a little bit and reflect. And like, even when it comes to like buying things, taking 3 days to think, actually, do we need that? Let's have a cooling off period. I bought something today that actually I didn't need.
What did you buy?
I haven't told you yet.
Oh, for God's sake. Here we go.
No, actually just some photography books, but I didn't need them. And to be honest, at the moment, they weren't a priority, but I wanted to support the photographer. But actually, if I'd have taken the 3-day period, I'd have probably reflected back and not bought them.
Well, look, as an author, I think buying people's books is great. But I agree. Like, and we're not, I so much of this stuff I think wasn't discussed, certainly when I was, a kid and growing up, right? Like it was like, get your exam results, go and get a job, like all of, and it's when I know people struggle with the reality of social media and I think we've probably all experienced the negative sides of it too. But I do think like this prevalence of conversation about these kind of things, is such a positive of what's come out of the past, 5 to 10 years. And I really you see the difference in, the young people today. They're just so much more thoughtful about this stuff than I ever was when I was their age. I think it's so impressive.
Can I say, however, the young people of today, you talk a little bit about, you already in this conversation, resilience and grit. And I think perhaps for all of us growing up, in our quest to try and achieve these objective markers of success, we probably did all build some resilience and grit, for better or worse. And actually, for modern young people, do you think the environment is right for them to build that? And maybe just talk about that as a more general topic. You talk about grit and resilience in this book.
Yeah, the chapter about quitting. I talk about these progressively less shit years. I think there's a real careers worth having are complicated. They have defined outputs, right? Whether you're a doctor or a salesperson or an inventor, you've got to do the thing that comes. But there's a million different ways of of like channeling the inputs. You can be, I look around, the trading floor, and you can be a salesperson that does the kind of matey, take everybody out sales. You can be really technical salesperson, all about, the Greeks and the deltas, and you can be great at financial modeling. You can kind of be the person that like corrals all the resources together. There's so many different ways of doing these jobs and being excellent at them. And of course, you show up at the beginning and you have no idea what your skill set is, and you have no idea what your authentic way of being able to be excellent is. And these things just take time. And I look at my career and, what I've been lucky enough to achieve, and that there's a whole bunch of luck in there, the opportunities that I've been given. But also I think a big piece of it is just that I stayed. And it's not about, and I say this very clearly in the book, right? This isn't about like putting yourself in a position where your mental or physical health is at risk, or you're taking abuse or anything like that. And again, I really hope the Dials framework helps people create some of those boundaries and prioritize, their mental and physical health and their relationships and all the things that keeps that show on the road, that enables you to stay when the career bit is difficult. But you're so often, I think, when people step out of these things, they're not starting. You reset that clock, and you've still got to go and work out how to do this other new thing. And Holly, I was listening to your podcast about your album, and you'd like it. You've got to start these things again, and it's hard. And it's not that it's not worth doing, but I think we should be able to talk more about the fact that these things just take time, and you're not doing it wrong or doing the wrong thing because you're finding it hard and you haven't nailed it 3 years in. Like, we can't all be Mark Zuckerberg and, like creating Facebook when we're 19 years old. Like, it's okay if it takes you 10 years to work out what your thing is and how to do it really well. And you're not broken and you haven't made a bad decision if you're kind of like, I'm not sure I'm enjoying this, I'm not sure I'm that good at it. Like, that's okay. That's what it looks like. That's what doing well over the long term looks like.
And you might never know particularly what you want to do when you're growing up. I think in that Baz Luhrmann song about sunscreen, like he says, the most 6-year-old people I know, they're the most interesting people, the ones that still don't know what they want to do when they grow up.
I think there's a real, and I talk about this too, it's a real, like, find your passion, you'll never work a day in your life kind of culture. Like, in the deification of entrepreneurship, and like, all full credit to all the entrepreneurs out there. It's a level of risk that I'm not comfortable taking in my life. But I don't think like finding a job you're passionate about solves these problems. If anything, it gets even harder to create boundaries and to keep, your mental and physical health safe, and to have all the other things that make a life worth living. If work has this like evangelical position in your life, there's a whole bunch of data I share in the book too, that about how, the best passions are developed. They're not found. It's not like down the back of the sofa. You've got to work at it. You've got to like, and be prepared to go and find it. And when you hear all this talk about, like, I found my passion, and you're just like, oh no, there's something wrong with me because I haven't found mine yet. And the things I love about my job, I had no idea existed when I was, 21 and at university. I had no idea, my job that I'm doing now didn't exist. I had no idea that these careers existed, and that what I find so enjoyable about banking would be what, push my buttons. And it's okay for that to take time to find out.
Have you come across a guy called Naval Ravikant?
No, I haven't.
He's like an angel investor, and he's written actually the most wonderful like modern philosopher. And he's like appeared on some kind of very big podcasts in the US, like Tim Ferriss. And he one of his phrases is that actually, to find a job you love is for amateurs. To turn a job into something that you're passionate about and find the passion within it is what the real people do. That's the serious work.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm butchering it. He said it far more eloquently and far more concisely, but the sentiment's there.
Yeah, and I think again, you guys, like, you do these very, you know, these jobs that look like really wonderful on the outside, right? Everybody wants to be a yoga teacher.
I hate
Everyone wants to
yoga.
be
Hate it.
be, to record albums and like, be a musician. But it doesn't that doesn't give you any space to talk about the reality of what that can mean. The teacher I did my teacher training with, um, like, I about to say traveled 51 weeks of the year, but it wasn't traveling anymore because he didn't have anywhere to go home to.
Oh
And
yeah.
like, that's not, he was very happy. That's not a life I would want to live.
No.
I think being a yoga teacher in London, super difficult life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Trying to make that work. And if we can't talk about, another chapter in the book is about these trades, if we can't talk about, I mentioned it already, the benefits of working for a big corporate, wonderful paid maternity leave. But I'm in the office every day when I'm not on maternity leave. Like, there are these like gives and takes and everything. And I think talking exclusively about work as passion kind of masks that like deeper, more honest conversation about what the trades, hopefully the things that you're giving away that are of low value to you, and things you're getting in return at high value to you, exist. And the fact that like nothing's going to be perfect, but I think if you get all these different dials on your dashboard, you can create a perfect combination for you.
How important do you think the role of your yoga practice has been in helping you to write your book and be where you're at today?
I like absolutely would have blown up if I hadn't, developed like a serious yoga practice. Like, it's such a fundamental foundation of like why I am where I am now, and why I've been able to kind of weather storms, like very positive storms, but storms like the past few months. And I haven't practiced. My yoga dharma has been turned right down. When I submitted the manuscript for the book, at the end of last summer, September, I started going back to yoga classes, and obviously with COVID and things, I hadn't been anyway. But it was a wonderful re-entry, and so I had 4 or 5 months of going to regular yoga classes, and that stopped this year because it just was, I just literally didn't have time or energy for it. I wanted to nap and sit on the sofa and read a book. And like, that is one of the things I find so powerful about the Dance framework. I was like, my yoga dial is there. It is like a core part of my life, but it's okay if it's turned down to a 2 out of 10 at the moment. Because that's the way that like I respect the season of my life. But I am sure that I will be practicing in some way, shape, or form my whole life. It's just given me so much perspective and so much practice at practicing, and being okay with all the little failures and things that go along with it. Yeah, like really essential.
I sometimes think that people beat them if people have a yoga practice, me included. If you sort of fall off the mat and fall off the yoga bandwagon, as it were, people sort of beat themselves up for that. But I think sometimes it's taking a step back and coming away from it really plays a part in helping you to live your life from a new perspective. Almost, it's like you've planted the seeds of doing the yoga practice, and then once you stop for a little bit, you're almost living what you've practiced in a way without actually doing the practice, if that makes any sense.
Also, I think like when you're pregnant, it's just such like
it's a practice by itself.
Oh my goodness, the lesson of letting go of your practice the first time you're pregnant is just like such a humbling experience. And even then, you're 9 months pregnant and maybe you can still do more than you expected to do. Then you're like, I'm 9 months pregnant, this must be the worst it gets, right? Then you have a baby, and then like 3 or 4 months later, you're, oh no, this is that now my body is a real mess and I can't do anything, and I've hurt my wrist, and I have like no core anymore. And it's just like, I feel like that lesson was like the most yoga practice I've ever done ever.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same.
I wonder if the reason people beat themselves up, just to kind of think, I'm just formulating this idea in my head, is the labeling. People are calling themselves yogis, and it can be for any hobby or any kind of modality. People label themselves as a yogi, and often society is a little bit more tribal now, in a sense. You become friends with other yogis who then all live a certain set of values and wear certain clothes and buy their life form mats, which I love, you know.
I love my life
But,
mats. I'm sat here in my aloe leggings, like it's, you know.
I just wonder if there's that pressure of, because we just willingly identify, we don't let ourselves perhaps have all these multiple dials. We say, I'm Adam Hustler, I'm a yoga teacher, and and an athlete, and that is my identity. Or I'm a yoga teacher and a dad, and that's just who I am. And we're kind of almost, maybe social media encourages that, to give ourselves very clear labels.
I think people find that, you know, I've experienced it. You know, it was when you know, Instagram and yoga started coming out in my corporate, you know, banking world, and like people were very confused. And even now, you know, I had a colleague come in today. She's like, "Oh, so you're going to go and be an author now?" Like I had to choose. Like it's very, people love to put each other, and look, I'm guilty of it too. I was listening to Dax Shepard's podcast the other day, and he started talking about like the greats of Russian literature, and I was like, who's this? Like, no way he's read like Tolstoy. And I was like, because you know, I was like, Hollywood actor, all the negative connotations. I didn't think like it was like, again, said so much more about me than him. But I think there's a big culture of putting people in a box, and you do your thing, and you be happy with it, and you know, don't you dare ask to kind of live more.
Yeah, without getting into it, the politics of it, like just in general politics, you know, people are either one side or the other, and every idea that they must be the idea of the group, not the idea of the individual. It's a sad time, isn't it? We need to see.
People like to belong. I think the underlying thing is people like to belong to something rather than actually believing in something. It's more a case of I need to belong to a tribe.
But then also we like to assume we know about someone because we know one characteristic of their personality. We like to assume we know everything about them.
Yeah, and you're all doing, you know, that quick, like, you know, you're kind of like, what do you do? Where you're from? You're like, you know, do you have a kid? You're like quickly trying to kind of work out what your connections are with people. And I don't think we're gonna change that, but it's one of the reasons, you know, it's one of the reasons I kind of do what I do, especially like to the, you know, younger women in my industry. Like I as I've discovered, I've got more senior, so many of the people I speak to at work are also living this kind of like multi-dial life, right? You know, they actually are really good at seeing their families, and they have, you know, they're running Ironmans, and they have all these other hobbies and passions and things too. But like, I'm not encouraged to talk about it because there is this culture of, you know, you must, I think, in many industries of like your work has to come first. And like I feel like really strongly that I want to show that this is what life can look like in you know, my industry, and I think a lot of other, you know, intense industries as well. Like you can like exist as a multitude, and it doesn't make you less committed to any of those things, including being a parent. You know, I don't love my kids less because I work. Like I think that all of those things can be true, and the more of us that can like show that that's the case, hopefully the less we get stuck in those boxes in the first place.
There's a really nice quote on your Instagram about how you're not tired because you're working too much. You're tired because you're not doing enough of what lights you up on the outside. And I thought that was really, really lovely. I've not heard it put like that before.
I'm going to forget it, that the philosopher that said it, but I do quote him in the book. But yeah, it was just such a, you know, I thought it was such a wonderful expression of it. Yeah.
What are your personal dials looking like at the moment, if you don't mind me asking?
So look, it's been work and the book have kind of taken everything they have from me. And look, my kids, like I'm very firm about, you know, spending enough time with my kids every day. And that means like, you know, we need to eat a meal with them every day, and things. So yeah, like I have a Peloton bike that I adore that I've not been on basically this year. I haven't been to a yoga class in a few months. I've like managed a few bits of self-practice, but nothing like where I would normally be. And I've said this at my my book launch, like I've been a pretty bad friend and daughter in the past few months too. And all those are all things that that I would like to tweak those dials in the next few months. But those are the bits that are adjusting, I think, the most. The dials that have stayed very steady, the kind of money dials and the impact dials that I mentioned before. Yeah.
Can we talk about how your dials, or not yours, but anyone's dials relate to other people? So I guess two elements to this question. One is, do you share your dials with like your partner or your closest friends, etc.? That's one element. The other element is we might identify that actually, no, this isn't the season for family. But how do you then tell your family that this isn't your season in my life? How do you have that kind of conversation?
Look, honestly, like I've had this conversation like with my parents. I'm lucky enough to have them living down the road, so they're like really hands-on with my kids, their grandkids. And mum was like, "Are we going to see you anytime soon?" I'm like, honestly, no. I love you guys dearly. Like, this is what's going on. I'm going to make a special effort for these like one or two things. And like, talk to me if it's a problem. Like, please talk to me. But like, right at the edge of my capacity on two things. This job that I've been working 20 years to get. This book that's been 3+ years in the making, and there's no third book. Like, this is my contribution. These are like life defining things for me. And I think I know the people that love me are like supporting me doing that, because I also see them, they're like scooping up my kids and like delivering meals and things and like doing all the, I just feel so loved and supported. So I hope that this gives people the language to talk about these things. And then the first part of the first question you asked, Adam, was about kind of how it all relates to people. And in the impact chapter, one of the things I shared, a journalist called Ezra Klein talks about this, like encourages us not to think about ourselves as an individual, but as nodes in a network, and like a global network. And that, I think you look at social media, you look at politics, like there can be a big, if I'm going to have an impact, if I'm going to change the world, I have to have this big platform and I have to have some grand way of doing it. He talks about like catching veganism from his wife. And now he then became a vegan, and now he's like transmitted that onto more of his friendship group too. And I'm not a vegan, but like I love that idea of like we all are like nodes for change in like our small part of the network, but the whole network is connected. And those like impact and how we change the things that we care about doesn't have to be this huge perfect platform. You can just start with those people that you're lucky enough to get to like hear and see and touch.
I love that.
Nice. Let's do some little quick fires now, if we can.
Love it.
So gadget wise, I saw normally this is a weird question, but I saw you not advertising, but sharing the fact you love your little keyboard, your little portable
keyboard. I love
keyboard.
my keyboard.
A musical keyboard.
No, like a folding keyboard.
Typing.
Oh, okay.
Are there any other gadgets that you found useful to be such a productive person and a time efficient person?
Yeah, the folding keyboard is like Google Microsoft folding keyboard is life-changing bit of kit, because you can actually fully type wherever you are. I have like pop sockets on my phones, because then I can stand them up and I can type. And other gadgets. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna go for the keyboard. It's the best bit.
Does that one work with an Apple phone? What phone do you have?
Yeah, I have it. I've got an iPhone. It connects. I have a work iPhone and a home iPhone. It connects to all my iPhones. You can even connect it to your TV, and you don't have to type in those annoying passwords. But yeah, it's a great bit of tech.
God, Adam loves a gadget. When you're not in productivity mode and your rest and relax dial is up, what does that look like?
So I started reading novels again once I finished the manuscript, and I've loved, like, I haven't read fiction, I don't know, since I was a teenager. So I've really, 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 really loved getting back into reading novels again. And I do love a box set, watch a fair bit of TV.
What are you watching at the moment?
So I finished like obviously watching Succession right now. I loved Last of Us, even though it was like terrifying. If you have any like pandemic hangovers, don't watch it because it is like mildly traumatic. What else? I just finished watching The Diplomat on Netflix, which is total like politics trash, but very good fun. Yeah, I'd love a bit of trash TV.
I think fiction is so important. I think one of the happy stages in my life in terms of reading was when I told myself that at home, I'm only allowed to read non-fiction and kind of workbooks, and then out and about to split the day up on the tube, and like I could only read fiction.
That's a good idea.
And it was
a great idea.
It was really wonderful, and it was just a nice break from the intensity of life to sit on the tube and read whatever I was reading at the time. Yeah.
What book would you guys recommend right now?
Oh, fiction wise, what have you read?
Do you know, it's funny because I've literally been thinking about my life today and thinking I want to read more fiction, but the way I'm doing it is I want to do it on a Sunday, and the weekdays are going to be my non-fiction, so I'm breaking
Well, I quite like fantasy. I'm not a fan. This applies to both TV and book. I don't like books that make me depressed, particularly. It is important to build empathy, so I want our little child to read some depressing books so he understands people. But at this stage in my life, I want lightness, so I read a lot of kind of like fantasy. There's a guy who wrote. One of our former guests recommended it, Tiffany, who's like a literal rocket scientist and climber. She recommended, it's called The Rivers of London. And it's this guy's writing fiction about London. It's a series. Apparently it's a bit like Neil Gaiman style, mixed with Terry Pratchett.
Have you read
that
it?
kind of, and I bought it. I haven't read it yet. Yeah.
Neil Gaiman is amazing as well.
So my husband's very much of this, like he doesn't like to read depressing books. I quite like to read depressing books. So he's now decided he's just not going to take my recommendations anymore.
And where can people find you? What do you want people to know about you and where to find you?
Well, look, I'm me on the internet now. So I'm Rebecca.Anderton.Davies Instagram. The book is called Shifting the Dials, and it is on Amazon and in a bunch of Waterstones, and I'm sure in other places too. Instagram and the book, those are the best places to find me. And if I'm a hugger, so if you do see me out and about, can you give me a hug as well?
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for being a guest.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice. Adam, I'm sure I've been to some of your classes in the past as well, in pre-kids life. So yeah, it's really, really nice to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So that recording is stopped. This is still on. We edit this. That was wonderful. I thought that flowed. That flowed. We don't need that anymore.
It was going so quickly.
You guys are really good at this.
So are you.
Holly's shifting down the podcast style at the moment.
I had a breakup conversation with Adam yesterday because you know what it's like being a mum. Like your brain is just so cluttered, and I just want to sort of declutter it at the moment and just have a break for the summer and then come back. So I do love it when I'm chatting.
Holly's only coming back for select people, and you were one of those select people.
Yeah, but like you guys have got to do a bunch of prep and it is also I hadn't doing media and things over the past few weeks. I didn't realize it's just this low level performance anxiety of I can't I don't want to fuck it up and there's lots to it. There's more, and that's why most podcasts only last 10 episodes maximum. We're almost on 100,
We've
but
loved it though,
the amount I think it's something like 95% end by episode 10.
It's a lot of work for you. I don't do anything. I just show up and talk.
But because you do all the editing and stuff as well.
Yeah, so the work involved is obviously the research, the getting the guests, the recording, the editing. We've started to do the videos as well now to put them out there. And of course, sometimes numbers can demotivate. Yeah, sometimes episodes do amazingly, but the work. I've always been tempted to get PR, but then it's just another thing. Spending $3,000 on 3 months of PR is just
I really battled with hiring whether I was going to hire my own PR for the book, and I did it and I'm glad these things like this wouldn't happen if I hadn't but I really, really battled with it, and I've done it for the 3-4 months of the book, and then
I think it's worth it. I think when you have a finite launch, I think for us because there's no finite thing coming out, it's just continuous. It didn't seem to make sense, but I think when you have if I was to write a book, I would definitely get some PR in that context. But we'll let you go now, and we'll get to bed as well.
Thank you so much for having me, and let me know when it's going to. lovely to meet you. And let me know when it'll be on. So I can tell work, but B, then I can like do a whole bunch of socials as well.
Yeah.
And all we'd need from you at some point, again, not an immediate rush, but if it's in your mind, send it whenever you can soon. A few images, including one headshot. And then whatever bio you're currently using would be amazing.
Great. I will. Do you know what? I will get my PR team to do it because that's what they're there for.
That's what we're doing.
Honestly,
Awesome. Have a lovely evening.
Look, have a good weekend, guys.